Good morning, everyone. We are going to start our press conference momentarily. If our speakers could go back on camera and go ahead and keep yourselves muted. Any participants or press, could you please mute yourself when you come in? Thank you. All right. So good morning, everyone. I'm Jillian Graber, Executive Director of Protect Ph.D. I am going to be sharing my screen now so you can see our presentation for today. If you're just coming in, we're going to be starting right now, and go ahead and make sure you're on mute. Okay. Everyone should be able to see my shared screen. Maybe give me a thumbs up if you can see it. All right, great, thank you. So my name is Jillian Graber. I'm the Executive Director of Protect PT. We are a nonprofit organization working to ensure safety, security, and quality of life for people in Westmoreland and Allegheny counties. And thank you so much for joining us today. I want to, we're going to go over our speakers for today. We still have people coming in, but we have several speakers for today. And why are we here? We are here because there is a new fracking waste injection well that's planned for Plum Borough. And we're going to be, our first speaker is going to be going over a little bit about what a waste injection well is and why that's important for our community. We're also going to be talking about we're going to introduce you to the site and some issues of mine subsidence. We're going to talk about the engineering inadequacies within the permitting. We're going to discuss radioactivity and waste, health impacts, and we're going to have at the end questions for the press. We ask if you are a resident and you would like to speak to the press. This is going to be recorded, or this is being recorded. We're live on YouTube and we're live on Facebook. So just to let everyone know that ahead of time. And if you do not wish to be recorded, then go ahead and turn your camera off. And we'll be accepting questions from the press. So go ahead and put those questions in the chat. And at the end of the presentation, we're going to be taking those questions one by one from folks in the chat. Okay, so just to kind of give everyone an idea of what the timeline is or was for this particular infrastructure, in July of 2017, the EPA had a hearing where dozens of residents spoke and hundreds showed up to talk about the waste injection well in Plum Borough. In March of 2018, the EPA approved the injection well based on the Clean Water Act. And in October 2018, the DEP held a public hearing as well. And then in April of 2020, the DEP permitted this Sedat 3A injection well. Now, in May of 2020, Plum Borough officials actually appealed the EPA permit with the Environmental Hearing Board. Then they withdrew their effort and abandoned that effort, which essentially made it made any local resident that wanted to challenge this unable to do so by legal means. So this request to the governor is our last opportunity to really try to protect the water system in the Pittsburgh region. So some major resident concerns that we have heard over the years: drinking water contamination, surface water contamination, mine subsidence, road degradation from the hundreds of trucks that are going to be coming to and from the site every day, radioactivity, air quality and health impacts, and of course, truck traffic is a big one. So I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, Matt Kelso. He is a Plum resident, and he works with the Frack Tracker Alliance as well. And Matt, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and make sure your video is on?
Sure, thank you, Jillian. So the Sedat 3A saltwater disposal well has been permitted for the disposal of up to 2,268,000 gallons of toxic and highly radioactive liquid oil and gas waste in Plum Borough, near the eastern border of Allegheny County. The borough is home to more than 27,000 residents who stand firmly against this project, the first of its kind in the Commonwealth's second most populous county. In 2017, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency held a hearing with nearly 200 residents in attendance. Every one of the dozens who spoke that day stated their opposition to the project, and those voices were ignored. In 2018, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection held a hearing of its own. Every one of the 19 people giving testimony that day stood strongly opposed to the disposal well, with many providing scientific evidence for their positions. And those voices were ignored as well. The borough's zoning hearing board rejected the proposal on the grounds that the borough was currently in the process of updating their ordinances. This was overturned by the zoning hearing board, a ruling that was later upheld by the Commonwealth Court. The borough council initially appealed the DEP permit, but withdrew their legal action for financial reasons. There has literally not been one resident of Plum that has come forward to support this project at any point since the public became aware of this proposed liquid dump site in the spring of 2017. As you will hear today, this is for good reason. For this community, the disposal well is all pain and no gain. These wells have a number of problems wherever they may arise, but this one in particular has additional fundamental problems that we feel the Department of Environmental Protection did not account for when issuing their permit to pump millions of gallons of toxic fluids less than 2,000 feet beneath residents' homes. These range from road degradation and inadequate traffic controls for more than 560 round trips of waste hauling trucks through steep and winding roads every month, to the possibility of well water contamination, to the potential for increasing exposure to radon gas for those who live above the Murraysville sandstone, as the radium in the waste fluids decays over time. And these are just a few examples. I'm going to talk a bit more in depth about one of these issues in particular. This kind of waste disposal injection well is firmly linked to induced seismic activity. In short, these wells have a habit of causing earthquakes, a fact established by the scientific community, the U.S. Geological Survey, and universally acknowledged by oil and gas producing states around the country. In 2015, the previously stable state of Oklahoma had more earthquakes than California because of this type of liquid waste disposal well. The pressurized injection of fluid, together with the added mass of that fluid, put stresses on ancient fault lines, including many that were unknown about prior to the induced seismic activity. Oil and gas states throughout the country are busy trying to balance the well-being of the public with the industry's insatiable need to dispose of billions of gallons of this waste fluid every single year. To residents living near these operations, it is an equation that can never be properly balanced. Induced seismic activity is a fact. What remains unknown is whether the operations at Sedat 3A will trigger man-made earthquakes in Plum Borough, and if so, what the consequences of these actions might be. The 27,000 people in Plum, along with our 20,000 neighbors in Murraysville and 2,300 neighbors in Upper Borough, don't want to be the guinea pigs in this experiment. The operator and DP have argued that earthquakes won't happen here because the injection zone is far away from the basement rock, the ancient rock formation that forms the continental crust. However, DEP was presented with scientific evidence that such wells also induce seismic activity in sedimentary formations, which include the Murraysville sandstone injection layer and everything above and below it for thousands of feet. What's more, such induced earthquakes can often have an epicenter miles away from the injection site, potentially putting other communities like Monroeville, Penn Hills, or even the city of Pittsburgh at risk. Similar wells have been documented to cause earthquakes in nearby Ohio, and another was blamed on fracking in Lawrence County, even though fracking-induced earthquakes are much rarer than those caused by waste injection wells. The operator and DP have argued that most of the induced earthquakes are quite small and do no real damage. This is in fact true, as it is of all earthquakes. However, to infer that significant earthquakes do not occur because of this activity is disingenuous. The largest confirmed earthquake of this type was the magnitude 5.8 quake in Pawnee, Oklahoma in 2016, which is enough to cause serious structural damage in an area where buildings are not designed to withstand earth movement. Will such a large earthquake happen in Plum Borough? An earthquake of that magnitude is obviously statistically unlikely, but it may not require such a large event to cause extensive problems in the region. This entire region has been extensively undermined with coal mines, and residents are still contending with issues from poorly managed energy booms of the past. The borough itself is about 90% undermined. Some houses sit atop the voids of multiple mined out seams. Mine subsidence is already a widespread issue here. What's more, the borough has contended with several decades-long mine fires throughout the region, further weakening the structural integrity of the subsurface. In fact, according to DEP data, the Sedat 3A well goes right through the Renton mine, a portion of which has been on fire since at least 1959. The burning area is about 2 miles away as the crow flies, but as we've seen, the actual epicenter of induced earthquakes in sedimentary layers can be unpredictable. In addition to the seismicity, these old coal mines can also act as a vector to allow these toxic fluids to contaminate drinking water aquifers or even surface water. It is unfortunately not unusual to see the streams in the borough run with that bluish-gray tint of mine drainage. The same Renton mine mentioned above has extensive infrastructure to treat mine drainage, and mixing in oil and gas wastewater will make these problems worse. The DEP should have known better than to permit a waste disposal well at this location. Before the Marcellus boom, officials in Pennsylvania came to the conclusion that the geology in the state was just not suitable for this type of well. And we certainly agree with that assessment. We know that Pennsylvania's unconventional wells generate billions of gallons of this fluid that nobody wants each year. But that does not make the decision to put tens of thousands of residents in the vicinity of this well at risk acceptable in any way.
Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about what this picture illustrates?
Sure. So this is a schematic of the site. So these are the tanks. You can see here they're quite large, 12-foot diameter tanks, some of them 25 feet high. And then you have these long solids settling tanks. So all of this is going to be receiving the waste, and it's going to be off-gassing here and settling, separating sludge from the liquids that get injected into the well.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. We also have another graphic that you put together about earthquakes. Is there
right? This is showing the earthquake boom after fracking, which started in earnest around 2010, and you can see in this part of the country, it's gone off the charts from what it was before.
Okay, so next we are going to talk to Dr. Anthony Ingraffea, Ph.D., and he is the Dwight C. Baum Professor of Engineering Emeritus and Weiss Presidential Teaching Fellow at Cornell University. And Dr. Ingraffea is going to talk about the inadequacies of the engineering in this permit. And Dr. Ingraffea was kind enough to look over the permit for us when writing this letter to the governor. So Dr. Ingraffea, would you mind unmuting yourself?
I'm ready. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's a great honor to be speaking for Protect PT and the other sponsoring entities to talk to you about something for which I have deep knowledge, and that is the structural adequacy of a proposed waste injection well and the permitting process by the EPA and the DEP that led us to where we are today. First and foremost, you have to understand that this proposed waste injection well was not designed and constructed as a waste injection well. It was designed and constructed 32 years ago as a relatively shallow, low pressure natural gas production well, bringing natural gas from a sandstone formation to the surface. However, now it is being proposed to be repurposed as a waste injection well, which is going to function entirely differently from that for which it was designed. Rather than low pressure upwelling of natural gas inside the well, it's now going to be tasked with injecting at much higher pressures repeatedly over a long period of time, liquid waste. This makes the well design from 1985, in my opinion, inadequate for this new intended purpose. I'm going to explain in the next few minutes why I think that's so. This schematic on the chart is literally a schematic. It's not the schematic of the actual well. And the actual well, despite what the EPA said in its permitting practices, does not have, emphasize not, 3 layers of steel and cement casing. It has only 2. I'm going to speak a little bit about each of those layers of casing and cement because they are the last resort. They're the moats. They're the walls beyond which we don't want to have the waste product which is being injected in this well to migrate out of the well and potentially into multiple underground sources of drinking water. The first casing I'm going to talk about in cement string is what's called the water protection string. In 1985, the well was designed to bring that layer of casing and cement to 643 feet below the surface. At that time, it was presumed that underground sources of drinking water were shallower than that, no lower than 600 feet below the surface. And yet, when Penneco applied to transform this well into a waste injection well, it found through its own research that there were numerous cases, some documented by their own drillers, observed during the construction of other adjacent wells, that other underground sources of drinking water occurred at much deeper than 600 feet. When questioned by the EPA during the permitting process, the response from Penneco was, that information is incorrect. And the EPA did not follow up. They took Penneco at their word. So that layer of cement and casing only goes down to 643 feet. I'll speak a little bit more about how I think that casing and cement currently looks in a few minutes. But let's proceed to the other crucial layer of cement and casing. That's the layer that goes down all the way to almost 2,000 feet, which is where this well supposedly is now going to be injecting its liquid waste. That casing and cement were not tested when the well was constructed using what was then and now called a cement bond log. Pardon the jargon, but a cement bond log is a set of equipment and procedures to try to determine whether the casing and the cement have been installed according to design and they're fulfilling their functions. Adhere the cement to the outside of the casing everywhere. Adhere the cement to the rock everywhere, and do not allow any liquid to escape through, along, or around the casing and the cement. It wasn't until 2015, when Penneco contracted to have a company come in and finally complete this well, that is, perforate it, punch holes in it down where the sandstone is, and perform a small-scale hydraulic fracturing experiment. At that time, they then did a cement bond log. They used the cement bond log practice that is, in my opinion, old school, not state-of-the-art. It basically takes an average reading of the condition of the cement in the casing and the adherence between the cement, the casing, and the rock along the vertical depth of the well. Rather than the EPA and the DEP requiring for this very, very important proposed project, which could put the water sources for a large number of people in jeopardy, rather than requiring a state-of-the-art cement bond log, they let the company get by with what is, in my opinion, inadequate conventional bond log. They should have been required to use a modern radial 360-degree visualization of all of the cement, all around the casing, from top to bottom. They did not do that. So in my opinion, what we're dealing with here is a 32-year-old well designed for one purpose that's now being called upon for an entirely different purpose. It's going to be experiencing much higher pressures than it was originally designed for. Those pressures are going to be repeatedly applied over a long period of time. It is well known in the engineering community, whether you're talking about the wing of an aircraft or a gas well, that the more times you put it under stress, the higher the probability that something will go wrong. And if something does go wrong and fluids can escape around or along or through the cement and casing, which have not been adequately experimented with and observed, then the possibility is that we will get migration into an underground source of drinking water. The last comment I want to make is that when that small scale hydraulic fracture experiment was done back in 2015, the pressure at the surface at which that well did in fact propagate hydraulic fractures down in the sandstone is exactly the same pressure that the EPA is now permitting this well to operate in as a waste injection well. This means there's a very high probability that during its lifetime as a waste injection well, horizontal hydraulic fractures will propagate away from this well in that sandstone. It is impossible to predict, for anyone to predict at any time, how far those hydraulic fractures will propagate. But they will be pushed by very high pressure with a very large volume of fluid over a very long period of time. And this puts further at risk the possibility of those injected fluids coming in contact with a conduit that could have result in a contamination of underground source of drinking water, resulting in the kind of impacts that you're about to hear from the next two speakers. Thank you for listening to me today.
Thank you, Dr. Ingraffea. Next, we have Melissa Troutman. She is Research and Policy Analyst for Earthworks, and she's also co-founder of Public Herald, and she's going to be speaking on the radioactivity in waste. So, Melissa, if you could unmute yourself, go ahead and start speaking.
Thanks, Jillian. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I wish it wasn't such a terrible proposal that brings us together this morning. But yeah, I'm Melissa Troutman. Like Jillian said, I am a research and policy analyst at Earthworks. And I'm also the co-founder of Public Herald, which is an investigative news nonprofit where we've been covering the cover-up of water contamination from the fracking build-out in Pennsylvania for the past decade. And before I jump into radioactivity and oil and gas waste, which is what I'm tasked with today, I do want to share that Public Herald released in 2020 a film called Invisible Hand, which features the story of a community just an hour away from Pittsburgh who stopped an injection well in their community. Grant Township in Indiana County, Pennsylvania, passed a local law several years ago, and in March of 2020, the DEP actually revoked the injection well permit. And so if you're interested in that, you can visit invisiblehandfilm.com. If you're interested, you can also search in a web browser, Grant Township forces Pennsylvania to revoke injection well permit. And you'll come up with some good articles there. Anyway, radioactivity and oil and gas waste. It's a fact. Oil and gas waste streams contain both hazardous and radioactive materials. How do we know this? Because the industry itself, government and academia have been documenting the radioactive burden of this waste for decades. A couple examples. One big one from last year, January 2020, a massive investigation was published in Rolling Stone called America's Radioactive Secret. And in that, two main points I want to share with you. The industry has known about the real risks of radioactivity in its industry and waste for decades. And two, there's a direct link between radioactivity in this industry and cancer in workers from exposures on the job. Back in 1982, the American Petroleum Institute had a report prepared. And that report found that almost all materials used in the petroleum industry, associated with the industry, contain measurable quantities of radionuclides that end up in the equipment, the product streams, so the natural gas and the oil itself, and the waste. They also found that that the water or brine solutions, or the wastewater from the industry, contains biologically significant quantities of radium-226 and radon-212. I want you to remember radium-226. That is a particularly nasty radionuclide that we're going to talk more about. Jillian, if you could advance a couple slides, please. Next one. Next one. Yay, there we are. Oh, nope, go back one. No, back the other way. There we go, the one with the numbers. Perfect. Okay, so remember, radium. Radium is a particularly nasty radionuclide found in oil and gas waste. We have a federal drinking water standard for radium that is 5 picocuries per liter, only 5. The USGS in 2011 produced a report that found that radium in oil and gas wastewater, which is what's going down this injection well, in our northern Appalachia Basin has really high levels of radium. In the waste from conventional wells, the smaller, shallower wells that are in our backyards, those levels are over 1,000 picocuries per liter. From the Marcellus Shale formation, they found levels over 2,400 picocuries per liter. The New York Marcellus Shale is even higher. And in Greene County, so south of Pittsburgh, they found levels of radium in wastewater there over 6,000 picocuries per liter. And that's not as high as it goes. They actually found levels up to 10,000 picocuries per liter. And remember that our drinking water limit is 5. Next slide, please. Our own Department of Environmental Protection also did a study on the radioactivity in the industry. And even they found that the liquid waste, which they call produced water, from the Marcellus Shale is up to over 26,000 picocuries per liter of radium-226. Radium, by the way, has a half-life of 1,600 years. And if that's not enough, it gets hotter as it breaks down in a process called ingrowth. Next slide, please. Hazardous and radioactive materials from oil and gas waste have already contaminated our Commonwealth and continue. We know this, again, because of the wonderful studies that places like Duke University and Penn State University have done for us. Next slide, please. In January 2018, Duke University found that even though the liquid wastewater from conventional wells, those are the shallower ones in our backyard, even though that wastewater is treated to reduce its radium content, it has still created, and I'm quoting, high levels of radioactive buildup in stream sediments, end quote. And in May of 2018, Penn State University found that spreading that wastewater from conventional wells on the roads can result in 200 times more radium in the environment from spills. And the researchers also noted that the release of radium into the environment through the spreading of oil and gas waste on roads has been largely ignored. It's not well studied. The point from all of this is that radium is persistent. It does not go away. And so if it would happen to leak into a drinking water supply or into the soil surrounding a drinking water supply, it's going to persist there with a half-life of over 1,600 years. Next slide, please. The last thing I want to mention is a little something that the industry likes to say about its radioactivity. You may hear sometimes that the industry says that bananas contain more radioactive material than oil and gas waste. And I want you to remember, if you hear anything this insane, what I want you to remember is that the radioactive material in a banana is not the same as the radioactive material in oil and gas waste. What do I mean by that? Bananas contain potassium-40, which is radioactive, but which also breaks down into non-radioactive materials. As it decays, it gets cooler and safer. This is not true for radium-226, which is in oil and gas waste, which is going down this proposed injection well in Plum. Radium-226 gets hotter or more radioactive with decay. Also, radiation exposure from bananas is not the same as radioactive exposure from the radioactive materials in waste. So we're talking about apples and oranges here, certainly not bananas. They're completely different things. It is a false equivalent. Just don't buy it. And that's all.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. Next, we will have Dr. Ned Katire. He is the Physicians for Social Responsibility and Southwest PA Environmental Health Project. He works with those two organizations, and he's going to be discussing the health impacts. So Dr. Katire, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Jillian. Thank all of you for joining this important press conference. I'm grateful that you're here. I'm also honored to be on this panel. This is a very, very good panel. So my name is Dr. Ned Katire. I'm a pediatrician who lives and works in Washington County, Pennsylvania, which is the most heavily fracked county in the state. I'm a member of the American Academy of Pediatrics Council on Environmental Health. I'm a medical consultant for Southwest Pennsylvania Environmental Health Project, which is a nonprofit public health organization helping protect residents and communities from the health harms associated with fracking in Pennsylvania and other oil and gas patch communities around the country. I'm a board member for Physicians for Social Responsibility Pennsylvania. PSR, along with Concerned Health Professionals of New York, has recently published the 7th edition of the Fracking Science Compendium. This new edition contains more than 2,000 peer-reviewed scientific and medical studies, investigative reports, and media stories related to fracking, and adds even more evidence supporting the conclusion that fracking cannot be done without directly threatening public health, and that includes the waste stream. Large volumes of toxic flowback water return to the surface after a well is fracked. You would never allow your children to drink this water, and you wouldn't drink it either. In fact, the water that flows back is so contaminated with organic salts, toxic chemicals, heavy metals, and radioactive material that it must be disposed of forever and never allowed to be returned to the natural environment. That's how dangerous it is to the environment and to our health. The salty brine extracted along with the fracked oil and gas is extremely corrosive to the skin, to the gastrointestinal tract, and to the steel and cement skeleton that constitutes an underground injection well. Dozens of toxic chemicals contaminating wastewater from fracking operations are known to cause cancer and other health problems when children and adults contact or ingest them. As you may know, southwestern Pennsylvania is already experiencing a decade-long outbreak of rare childhood cancers, including Ewing sarcoma, which some think may be related to the rapid development of shale gas in the region. Flowback water destined for injection wells also contains dangerous heavy metals like lead and arsenic and mercury. None of these in our drinking water and soil are healthy for us, our children, and our grandchildren, in which even small doses are extremely harmful. And as you just heard from Melissa, the Marcellus Shale is highly radioactive. Water-soluble radium has a half-life of 1,600 years. If radioactive wastewater ever gets into our rivers and aquifers, It could have devastating health consequences for residents downstream whose lives depend on safe drinking water. Thinking that you can safely entomb the toxic components of highly contaminated and concentrated frack waste in underground rock formations is, it turns out, wishful thinking. It is dangerous, it is unwise, and it is irresponsible. In 1 year, in a decade, a century, or a millennia, the earth will shift, the surface will fold, and oil and gas wells and underground wastewater injection wells will corrode, crumble, and fail. Fracking has a toxic and radioactive waste problem. Disposing of this waste is inherently dangerous and cannot be solved by industry rules and government regulations or by using flawed technology. Injecting this waste into an unstable well near homes, businesses, schools, and playgrounds in close proximity to unstable wells near homes, businesses, schools, and playgrounds in close proximity to our drinking water sources is short-sighted and irresponsible. It disrespects the basic needs of our children, our grandchildren, and all generations to come for clean water, vibrant land, and a healthy future. True stewards of our natural heritage would never let this irresponsible and disrespectful plan move forward. It should be abandoned immediately. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gatire. And so we're going to be, I put up here the contact information for all our speakers. I do want to mention that on Protect PT's webpage that Mary posted in the chat, we posted this video. We posted the letter that we sent to Governor Wolf. We also posted a memo from Dr. John Stoles, who is offering free water testing for private well owners in the Plum area to have their wells tested. It's very important to have pre-drill testing or pre-construction testing in this case, or injection testing to make sure that your water well has been monitored before any activity happens at the well site. So please consider that if you're a private well owner. And we're going to go ahead and open it up to questions. So we have some residents, we have our speakers, and we have, I believe, a couple or at least one local official that might want to speak as well. If everyone could unmute yourself when you have a question. And please, for the press, please put your questions in the chat. I understand that somebody had a question about where this well was located. And it is located in Plum Borough, which is in Allegheny County. Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about the exact road or place where the well is located?
Sure. This is off of Old Leechburg Road in Plum Borough, and it's near the border of Allegheny County and Westmoreland County. So it's really also very close to Upper Burrell and Murraysville. And I see that there's a question about how close it is to the nearest homes and businesses, and it's really a couple of 100 feet from the well to the nearest home.
Yes, thank you, Matt. Do any reporters have questions? I see the letter to Governor Wolf link leads to the page where the links, okay. We will make sure the link, it looks like the link might be broken that Mary put in the chat. Mary, would you just check that to make sure that that's not broken? We have a comment. We've had 2 earthquakes here in Washington, PA over the past 3 some years. Both occurred in fracked areas. Do any press have any questions for our speakers? Go ahead and unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question.
Hi, this is Reed Frazier. I saw this in the chat from Mike Lee, so he's another reporter. I'll just ask it again. How close are these wells to people's homes, specifically people who have well water? I don't know if that was said, but.
Matt, I believe you answered part of that.
Yeah, it's within a couple of 100 feet to homes on Old Leechburg Road. I don't have the exact measurement, but it's certainly in the hundreds and less than 1,000 feet. And yes, there are people with well water in the immediate vicinity. That's something that came up in the hearings with EPA and also DEP.
Yeah, I recall several residents talking about their well water as a concern at those local hearings. And do you have the address again, Matt? The address so folks could actually, Google it on a map and see exactly where it is and where the homes are surrounding it?
I believe so. Let me verify that quickly.
Sure. Okay. Were there any other questions? Reed, did you have another question?
So, Dave Bento, maybe you can answer this. What is are there folks around there who are aware of what's happening? How high is their level of concern? Are any of them on this call right now?
I don't know if anybody's on the call right now that lives close by, but I remember from the various public meetings I attended and we did have as a borough, that anybody that lives close, including people in Lower Borough and down below, as some of you probably don't know, this is also on top of a large hill in Plum Borough, and below it, in relative close proximity, are a lot of homes that border along the Route 366, which is directly below the well. There's only about 10 homes in the general vicinity of Old Leechburg Road that I would consider probably in danger. Maybe not even 10, but there are a few, and I do believe most of them do have well water, because I don't think the borough water runs down to all of them. I could be wrong. They might be getting water from another source. But people are very worried about that live close. The problem was, after the initial anti-fracking press that we got, and everybody was worried, there were more people, as far as the Plum Borough aspect, that came to the meetings that were for this, that owned land, that wanted to be able to sell. This is when they were talking about getting these wells and making a lot of money for the residents, and I was pretty much at that time the only borough councilman that was speaking out against this. There was a different makeup on the council at that time than there is now. The rest of them were all in favor of it. They didn't think they could stop it. There was a lot of excuses, but that's what it came down to. They were in favor of it, and they weren't willing to look for other options to go against it. So then that became the injection well. People came, and people just didn't come out to speak against the actual injection well until they found out it was actually there, and that's why when the borough did try and go against them, when we were denied our appeal, we were advised by our solicitor at the time, well, still the solicitor now, that we didn't have much else we could do rather than taking them to court and spending a lot of money. And that as soon as the other people heard that, it was no, we're not doing that. So again, I was the lone voice that wanted to continue. And that, as everybody knows, it's been around politics at all. If you're only one person speaking against something, you have little to no chance to having it go your way. So that's where we're at now. Like I say, the makeup has changed in our council, but I don't know how we can get the whole council back on board, if we can.
Okay, thank you very much for that explanation. And I believe it answered part of Don Hopi's question. It says, please review again the appeal process for this well. Why isn't this before the Environmental Hearing Board? So it was before the Environmental Hearing Board, as Mr. Vento explained. The borough of Plum did file an appeal to that, then did end up withdrawing that appeal. Unfortunately, because no residents knew to kind of work with the township or work with the borough in that legal proceeding. When the borough dropped that really didn't left the residents with no other legal recourse to challenge it. So that I don't know if that answers all of your questions, or if you have another question, please let me know. Matt, do you have anything else to talk about with that?
I think those are the main points of how this unfolded over the years. Yeah.
Okay. We also have a question from Mike Lee. Back in April, media reports said the well was unlikely to open because of the downturn in the oil business. Has that changed? Also, there is a street address for the well. What's the street address for the well so they can look it up on Google Maps? And I think, Matt, you were looking that up. Is that correct?
So I posted a link. I believe that the street address is 1865. It's certainly extremely close. If that's not the actual street address, it will get you to the right place. So 1865 Old Leechburg Road, and that'll say, I believe, New Kensington, but it's in Plum. If you look that up, based on the zip code. And I'm sorry, the other part of the question was?
Back in April, the media report said that this well was unlikely to open because of the downturn in the oil business. Has that changed?
Correct. That is what Penneco said in a news report. And very shortly after that, driving by the site, you could see that there was a lot of heavy equipment happening at the top of the hill. I mean, obviously, we can't go up the hill because it's private property, so we can't check out exactly what's going on. But there's certainly a lot of heavy construction happening up there.
Yeah, and despite the economic downturn and really the financial house of cards that is the fracking industry, there are still wells being permitted, and there are still new wells being drilled and being fracked. So at any time, operators need another place to dump their waste, then they can always call on this permit and this potential solution to that at any point in time, because it is permitted. So the only way to permanently take care of that and find a solution to that would be for the governor to revoke that. There was a question about has the governor rescinded other permits, or would this be precedent setting? I don't know of any. Does anyone else on the call know of any that the governor has rescinded before? No.
I don't. I think the only one I know of, Jillian, is the Grant Township injection well permit that was revoked by DEP itself. And when DEP revoked that permit, they cited the township's local law as the reason. And so I'm not I'm assuming that Plum is a second-class township. I don't know if Dave, if you all have considered becoming a home rule municipality at all, but that's the way that Grant did it. They were a second-class township. They became a home rule municipality, which in Pennsylvania gives you more authority over what happens in your community. And it's through that home rule charter that they banned the injection well, and it's the charter that was cited in DEP's revocation of the injection well permit. But that's the only time I've ever seen a permit revoked.
Plum Borough is a borough. Plum is a borough. It's not a township at all. We have talked about it very, very preliminarily about changing to a home rule municipality. That's been discussed. There has been little to no positive reaction to that for other reasons that I know of. I'm not sure about this reason alone, but I am very worried. I see down below that Dylan Carr and another person said something about, they talked to Penneco and they're looking to open the facility in March. I wasn't aware of that. The problem with Plum is initially, and this is what I think they won their case on, we didn't have anything in our zoning laws against fracking injection wells. Well, who knew about fracking injection wells at the time? So that's how they're getting into these communities. They're using us as a hook to get in and not be made to leave. So if, there again, I've said it many times, if any, a cautionary thing, if you work for your government, please look at your zoning laws carefully to see where this, is allowed and not allowed, if you have allowing for it, or if you have it at all in your zoning or, planning. So make sure you look and do your due diligence. I'm sorry to say we didn't in Plum, and that's what allowed them to get in. So,
Dave, if I can just ask another quick question. Do you know if a zoning ordinance has to be in place before the permit is issued?
well, in our case, it certainly did.
Okay.
So I'm not sure about all. In our case, that's what they cited as allowing it. We tried to change our laws, not to actually ban them, but to put them in a heavy industrial areas only, and that was found to be too restricting. So we weren't allowed to come back at them with that. So, I think if you put it in the heavy industrial area in your zoning before they come, then it is permitted. You still have to allow, supposedly from what the lawyers tell us, you have to allow them somewhere, so the thing to do is limit it to your most benign area of your community you possibly can. Some communities don't have any. So if they limit it to their, they can keep it to a minimum, and hopefully they don't have the same problems that Plum had.
Okay, I have a question from Dylan Carr. It looks like Penneco has said that they expect to use this injection well, which is under construction currently, by spring. What will happen next if the government does not revoke the permit? Also, what permit is the government asked to revoke specifically? They are asked to specifically revoke the DEP permit for the Sedat 3A injection well in Plum, Pennsylvania. And I think maybe Matt or others that are local residents can talk about what happens next if the government does not revoke the permit.
Right. So if the governor does not revoke the permit, then presumably the operation will be allowed to proceed, and we'll start seeing a lot of truck traffic bringing in waste on heavy trucks and winding back roads. And then presumably the injection will proceed, and they'll start filling up those tanks that we showed earlier in the presentation, and that stuff will start off gassing, and they'll separate out the liquids and solids, and then start injecting this radium rich fluid down underground, about 1,950 feet underground, underneath people's houses. So that's what we're trying to stop.
We have another question from our YouTube channel. Is this permitted well commercial? Would it accept waste across state lines? So I believe it can accept any waste that the operator wants to accept. Is that correct, Matt?
I believe that is correct. I will say that currently a lot of waste from Pennsylvania is going to Ohio because they have more of these injection wells than Pennsylvania does. Ohio doesn't really want all of that waste, as you can imagine. And that's putting stress on Pennsylvania to create more of this kind of well, which, from the, business perspective of trying to get rid of this waste is a necessity, but from the, protection of the people is really a widespread problem that's only going to get worse throughout the state.
And we have another question from Reed Fraser. It says, Tony, where are you getting info on the perforated activity? Dr. Ingraffea, I think this question's for you for the perforation activity. Do you want to address that?
Yes, I responded in chat to Reed, but I'll summarize. Buried within the basically thousands of pages of permitting materials is a report from a sub. I can't off the top of my head remember the sub. It's one of the fracking organizations. There's a report describing all the work that they did on the well in 1985 to complete it. The well was never completed in 1989. That is, it wasn't fracked. It wasn't perforated. It wasn't fracked. the well never went into production. So in 1985, Penneco hired this company, and they came in and they attempted to create 41 perforations in the well into the Murraysville sandstone. And through those perforations, they attempted to do what's called a DFIT, also known as a mini frac, also known as a small scale hydraulic fracturing experiment, to learn as much as they could about the potential for the well to be used as a waste injection well. The key element there is how much fluid at what pressure can we hope to inject into that sandstone so that we do not frack it, but the sandstone receives this fluid as a sponge absorbing a liquid. And when they did these experiments, they found out that of those 41 perforations, only about 4 of them were actually functioning. That is, they were opened into the sandstone. The others were blocked. So they attempted to do some acid treatments to try to open up some of those perforations. I suspect at this point that some of the activity that's been ongoing since 2015 has been an attempt to get as many of those perforations operating as possible. Otherwise, they're going to have a lot of problem if this well ever goes into service as a waste injection well, using the allowable surface pressure to inject as much fluid as they want to into the well. I hope that answers the question.
And Dr. Ingraffea, you talked about the acid that they used. Could this acid also degrade the current casing, the cement casing that is the protection from to the water source from this injected fluid?
Well, you're bringing up the word corrosion, and I'm glad my colleague Dr. Katayer brought that up, as it was something I did mean to cover. So there are 2 sources of potential corrosion here for this well. One of which could have been occurring since 1989. The well sat there idle. I don't know, nor can I find anything in the permitting documents that said what was in the well during those 1989 to 2015 years. So there could have been corrosion from the inside of the well during that period of time, which is why I pointed out that one of the first things Penneco should have done, and EPA should have required, and DEP should have required, was a video camera inspection of the inside of that casing. As far as I know, that was not done. That would have been the most easy way, straightforward way to see if any corrosion had occurred. That same kind of corrosion from liquids, native liquids, could occur not from native liquids, but from the injected fluids. We know that the salinity of the injected waste is extremely high, tens or hundreds of times higher than that of seawater. And as you know, salt water and steel don't get along very well. So to the extent that there is leakage of the injected fluid into that casing, there is a potential for continued corrosion of that casing. The kind of corrosion you're asking now is when they inject hydrochloric acid, HCl, through the tubing that has access to these perforations. I'm sorry if you're not getting the picture, that you have a casing, steel, you've punched hopefully 41 holes into it. You have a tubing that comes down and is packered off so that whatever goes down the tubing doesn't come back up the inside of the casing. It only goes out through the perforations. That HCl, hydrochloric acid, goes into that part of the casing through which you have the perforations. So yeah, it is acting on that steel in that interval, that roughly 20-foot interval during which they have those perforations. Sorry, I'm waving my hand. There's no diagram available. I hope people who are listening can visualize this reasonably well. So yeah, when you inject acid into a well, hopefully it does what you want it to do, which is clear out the perforations, the cement and the rock particles that are in there as a result of these burnings from the shaped charges that happen with the result of perforating. But there's also potential for degradation of the casing in the area exposed to the hydrochloric acid. Long answer to a simple question.
Thank you, Dr. Ingraffea. I'm going to put questions up for Reed Frazier and then Dylan Carr. If I am missing your questions, please let me know in the chat, because there's a lot of questions and conversations in the chat. So I don't want to miss anybody, and I apologize if I am. Reed Frazier asks, Dave, is there any movement in Plum to rewrite zoning laws to control these types of wells? I think you talked about that a little bit, but are there future plans to do this now? What is that process like? And then Dylan Carr has a question as well.
We did update our ordinances right after this. I'm not sure they still encompassed the injection wells at the time. So I will look back over that and try and get you an answer that's more, on point. So I'm sorry I don't have that answer right now.
And Dave, just to let you know, if we have an ordinance in Penn Township that our councilmen or our commissioners enacted, we actually proposed changes to that ordinance, because it was pretty bare bones at first when they initially proposed it. And it is specifically for injection wells. So if you want to take a look at that, if you go to Penn Township, Westmoreland County, you can take a look at that and reach out to me if you have any other questions. And from Dylan Carr, what is the plan on part of the environmental groups presenting here if the governor does not revoke the permit before it starts its use in March? That's a really good question. On our part as Protect PT, we're here to advocate for the people and their constitutional right to clean air and pure water. So I would ask that anyone that has concerns about their well water, please get them tested. We do have an educational presentation called the Home Resource Guide presentation that's going to happen the last 2 weeks in January, where you can learn more about how to protect and how to advocate for yourself as a homeowner when dealing with this type of infrastructure, as well as fracking. So, we always try to advocate for folks to, protect themselves and learn about what to look for, learn about, how to spot potential issues or violations with laws, state and local laws. Does anyone else have anything that they'd like to comment on? Okay. Let me see if there are any other questions.
Jillian, there was a question about it going through the coal mine. Is it possible to go back to the map for just a second? We can show people what that looks like.
Sure. Sorry, Matt, go ahead.
So this dark gray layer here is the digitized mine layer that's published by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. They make this available on a site called POSDA, which is hosted by Penn State, but it's Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection data. So as you can see, the red dot here is the Sedat 3A well, and it goes right through this Renton mine layer here. And you can see nearby there's other mines. There's Springdale mine, and there's another version of the Renton mine. It's a slightly different mine, but also part of the Renton complex of mines. You can see also these are the houses that are nearby. There's a scale bar to answer that question. So definitely around an 1/8 of a mile, or maybe a 1/4 of a mile at most, to nearest homes. And there's all kinds of perforations in the form of other oil and gas wells. These are these yellow dots that are shown here. So I hope that helps to explain it. And this is this Pugada Creek is a very steep hill going from the drill site, or from the injection well site down to this creek, and this creek drains directly into the Allegheny River.
Thank you, Matt. I see a question from Mike Lee. Part of this question I answered in the chat. It is if the well starts operating, how likely is it that the industry will convert other old gas wells to dispose? I think that the waste is a huge issue with this industry, and any opportunity for them to solve a problem successfully will make it possible for them to convert other wells. I mean, in Pennsylvania, we have so many conventional wells that they could do this with. So that, and I believe Dave Vento spoke about this. If you're watching and you don't have a current injection well specific ordinance, this is something you want to think about doing. And local people can propose this in their community. Don't think that you have to be a local official to propose a new ordinance to your municipality. You can certainly do that. If you need help, you can contact Protect PT. We're welcome to talk with you through that process. And also another part of the question, did the well actually go into production after 1989? I think Dr. Ingraffea touched on that a little bit. And you mentioned that it goes through a coal mine. I think that Matt, you just talked about that a little bit. Dr. Ingraffea, do you want to talk about the production?
Yes, I did respond in chat, but I'll say the same thing here. The well, the Sedat 3A well was designed to be a natural gas production well, but it was never completed in 1989. That is, it was not perforated and fracked, and therefore it never went into production as a gas production well. It has sat idle since 1989, and the only action that I could find in all the documentation since then occurred in 2015, where, as I said before, a sub was hired to come in and complete the well and perform necessary small-scale hydraulic fracturing for them to figure out what rate of waste injection could be sustained by the well.
And I have a question here from our YouTube. When can we expect to hear from from Governor Wolf? I would encourage the press to reach out to the governor's office and ask him about the letter and really, pose the question directly to him. We had 49 organizations from across Pennsylvania, some of them national organizations, signing on to our letter. Our letter is available on our website. You can see all the folks that signed on to that. And we want to thank everyone for doing that. And we want to make sure that people have access to the letter. I would hope that the governor would write back to us, or someone from the governor's office would contact us and find out let us know what he's thinking about this. Really, I feel like this is part of the legacy of being the person in the state to have the power to protect the people of the state, especially when we have a Pennsylvania Constitution that allows for clean air and pure water. Our state constitution guarantees us that. We're one of the very few states that has that protection in Article 1, Section 27 of our Pennsylvania Constitution. And I would hope that his upholding his oath to protect the people of Pennsylvania and to uphold the Constitution would be enough for him to revoke this permit. But, I would encourage press to reach out to the governor's office to get comment, because when we've written to the governor before, we will sometimes not receive comment for several months. And we have received some form.
Oh, looks like Jillian just dropped off accidentally, and we'll just wait for just a second. Hopefully she can pop back on. Just hold on just a second. If you have any extra questions, feel free to log them in the chat, and we will get to those soon. We're just waiting for Jillian to come back. She said her computer just died.
Mark, may I say something quickly while we're waiting?
Yeah, absolutely. Please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. This is Melissa Troutman again. I just, covering this oil and gas waste issue for the past 10 years, I feel responsible to point out that as long as we support fracking, we support the production of oil and gas waste, which has to go somewhere. People don't generally think of oil and gas production meaning oil and gas waste production as well. But we have a ton of waste in the Commonwealth that's coming out of oil and gas wells, and it has to go somewhere. We don't want it to go in Plum. But we have to remember that when we say no, we don't want the waste from this industry here, it's going to go to another community. And I just want us to remember that there are injection well permits that are going to be proposed for other places as well. And so as we're asking the governor to revoke this particular permit, I think if folks are comfortable, it's also worth asking the governor to stop producing the waste in the first place. It's not something that the people benefiting from oil and gas production are dealing with directly. This is an externality that is pushed off onto communities who are not getting the royalty checks. So I just wanted to say that, so thank you.
I'd like to add something to that, if I may. Waste injection wells are a new thing in Pennsylvania. I don't have the data on my fingertips, but I would be willing to place a bet, my professional reputation, that when shale gas development began in earnest in Pennsylvania in 2004, 2005, there were no, or few, as in two, maybe, injection wells in the whole state of Pennsylvania. The waste was being transported out of state. As Melissa just said, we were dumping it on Ohio and West Virginia. And that's unfair. Now, with this increase in the demand for waste injection in Pennsylvania, the DEP, and I have a lot of good friends at DEP that I honor and respect, is once again being tasked for something for which they have very little experience and very little regulatory oversight and authority. I'm not surprised that DEP approved this permit. I'd be surprised if there were more than one or two people inside of DEP right now that have any professional experience in the construction, operation, regulation, or management of a waste disposal well. That is a person power problem. The DEP has had many of those. They're well documented. They weren't prepared for the shale gas onslaught, and that lack of preparation is manifest even today, 15 years later.
Okay, and I apologize for that, folks. My computer crashed, and thank you so much, Melissa, for helping out. And there was a question that I posted in the chat to you. I believe this was a question from online. I don't know if you can answer that. If the Benston and Bevel's exclusions were lifted from oil and gas waste, would Class 2 saltwater injection wells still be able to be permitted? And okay, so does anyone address that?
So I'm thinking, yeah, the person asking the question is referring to the exemption from at the federal level for the oil and gas industry from hazardous waste law. Under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, aka RCRA. And no, if the industry was not exempt from hazardous waste law that governs all other industries, this proposed well would not be able to take the oil and gas waste that it's proposed to take. So the industry is exempt at the federal level from hazardous waste law, which means it does not have to test any of its waste streams or most of its waste streams for hazardous waste criteria such as toxicity, reactivity, and corrosivity, which and this waste stream would pop on a couple of those tests. So no, this proposal as it is proposed would not be allowed. And this brings up a very, very important point, which is Representative Sarah Innamorato from Lawrenceville has introduced a bill to close the hazardous waste loophole in Pennsylvania. So the industry has been exempt at the federal level from hazardous waste law, and states across the country have adopted or mirrored that same hazardous waste exemption at the state level. And Representative Innamorato has a bill on the books to close that loophole. If the hazardous waste loophole is closed in the Commonwealth, this injection well would need a total reboot, and it simply would not be structurally sound for the injection of hazardous waste, which is what this stuff is. So, thank you. Very important question.
Thank you, Melissa. We also have a question. Are these wells regulated by the feds, right? Yes, there was an EPA process for the well that has, yes, Dr. Ingraffea, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I responded again in chat and writing to Bob on that question. The EPA has federal regulatory authority over this type of waste injection well, actually all types of waste injection wells. This is an oil and gas waste class 2D injection well. The EPA has primacy in regulating those. But the EPA can decide based on its judgment about a particular state's capability that it can transfer primacy from itself to the state, in which case the state is actually acting for the EPA. They have not done that in the state of Pennsylvania. Recall the comments I just made 2 minutes ago about the lack of capability and preparation in the DEP to handle the review for permitting and oversight and regulation of class 2 injection wells. So even at this point in time, 15 years into the big shale gas revolution in the state of Pennsylvania, the EPA is still saying, we're in control, guys. Now, they're only in control from a very narrow point of view. Will this proposed waste injection well unacceptably imperil underground sources of drinking water or surface drinking water? That is the only thing that they have regulatory control over. Hence, downstream of their permitting, there's the DEP permitting through oil and gas regulations, which were never written for class 2 injection well design. Everything else like traffic, dust, light pollution, air pollution, noise pollution, all those things that local residents may be complaining about when this well goes into operation and complaining about now where other wells are in operation, injection wells, that's out of the purview of the EPA. So you have this gigantic loophole. The EPA says, hey, this thing is designed, in our opinion, so that it's not going to imperil underground sources of drinking water by DEP. Anything else this well might do that violates the Constitution of the state of Pennsylvania? And DEP says, well, we don't have anything in our regulations about that for these kinds of wells.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Ingraffea.
Hence a letter to the governor.
Yeah. Hence where we are right now. Can you, Matt K., can you comment on the number of wells in Pennsylvania versus Ohio?
So I see that John Stoltz has provided that information in the chat. So he said that there's 223 class 2 wells in Ohio as of 2019 and 7 in Pennsylvania. I think that number in Pennsylvania is now 8. And there's, from what we hear, at least 14 or 15 more being proposed statewide. Just in terms of the sheer volume of waste that's being produced in Pennsylvania, it's on the order of billions of gallons per year. So it's a massive problem. They do try to reuse some of that, but when you reuse some of that, there's a side problem of the load of contaminants gets concentrated. So including the radioactivity. So all of this stuff gets more and more difficult to deal with as the products get reused and evaporated, and the contaminants get more concentrated. So initially, Pennsylvania tried to handle a lot of this with publicly owned treatment works. They would just send it to to places that deal with sewer sludge and hope that it worked. Well, it turned out that it didn't. And there were a number of pretty serious problems that were related to that, including disinfectant byproducts, trihalomethanes that were being created because of the bromides in the water. They had to stop that process back around 2011, 2012. And so they've been trying to figure out different ways to deal with it. Other states have been doing injection wells in a much more expanded fashion. Oklahoma has roughly 10,000 of them. But as you can see from earlier in the presentation, they're also now way past California in terms of the number of earthquakes per year. So there's consequences no matter how you try to deal with this waste.
Dr. Ingraffea, and I also then have a question from Mike Lee. Go ahead.
Do we have time for me to occupy this? Okay, yeah. Another comment about the EPA and regulation of injection wells. I challenge everybody to go back and take a look at the early 1970s legislation that gave the EPA the right to control underground injection of wastes. When it comes to class 2 injection wells from oil and gas, if you read the language, it says, in essence, put it back where it came from. I repeat that. You inject the waste into the same formation from which you removed the oil and or gas. Your oil or gas well depletes the supply, and you come back later and inject the waste into the same formation. That was the idea. Of course, that idea doesn't work for shale, because you extract the gas from shale, which is virtually impermeable. And the one thing that you want in a waste injection well formation is permeability, the ability for that stuff, that rock, to soak up and absorb that waste like a sponge. Shale can't do that. So basically, there's a principle violation here that has never been recognized in a court. No one's taken to the EPA to court and said, look, your original idea in regulating class 2 injection wells can't work in shale, because in 1970s, when the regulations were written, we weren't fracking shale. We weren't producing oil and gas from shale. So again, another big technological loophole that's resulted in a regulatory loophole that's resulting in our being where we are today. Pennsylvania should not allow waste injection into any formation other than the formation that produced the waste. And in that case, guess what? No waste injection wells in Pennsylvania. No waste injection wells in Pennsylvania. Well, here you go, Ohio. Or, as Melissa said, no fracking in shale.
Thank you, Dr. Ingraffea. We also have another question. So is there a chance the EPA under the new administration would reconsider the permit for this well? I have my own thoughts on that, but I want to see if anyone else has any thoughts on that.
I personally imagine it's a long shot for the EPA to reconsider their permit. They issued their permit back in 2018. And there are, as you know, there's tens of thousands of this kind of well around the country. So, I think that it requires someone who pays more attention to local issues like Pennsylvania DEP or the governor to take action on this.
Yeah, I really think that we need to rely on our Pennsylvania Constitution. Article 1, Section 27, the environmental amendment that gives us the right to clean air and pure water. It guarantees us as Pennsylvanians that right. And so this waste injection well not only will contaminate our air, with the hundreds of trucks, as Matt outlined in the beginning, that will be going to and from this site. Anyone that lives along that truck route will have air contamination from the diesel trucks. And then most importantly, the potential for widespread contamination of Pittsburgh's drinking water. that is the, in my mind, the first and foremost issue here, and it needs to be addressed by the governor's office because it has been not addressed by the DEP adequately. It was very short-sighted for them to issue this permit, not considering the long-term impact to the drinking water system for Pittsburgh. Anyone else want to comment on that? There is a comment in the chat. These tankers are known for ongoing rollovers and a couple cases killing motorists. Before we talk about that, I do want to thank everyone. In case folks want to get off, I want to thank the press for coming today and thank everyone for sticking around for this important topic, this important press conference. And I know that there have been lots of tanker rollovers, and as Matt talked about earlier today, there are lots of twisting and turning roads around where this site is. I think Dave Vento also spoke about that. So that's that's a possibility when you have roads like we have in southwestern PA, these rural back roads where they're not straight and flat. And if you're carrying a heavy load that moves around as water tends to do, you're going to have potential for those rollers overs to happen. Does anyone else want to comment on that, or are there any other questions before we get off? All right, hearing none, I want to thank everyone again for attending today to our press conference. We again want to ask the governor of Pennsylvania to uphold our constitutional rights to clean air and pure water and revoke the permit for the Plum waste injection well. And thank you to Melissa Troutman, thank you to Dr. Ingraffea, thank you to Dr. Gatire, and thank you to Matt Kelso for speaking today. Thank you also, Dave Vento, for coming and giving us a local perspective on the government view, and what residents have been dealing with for the last couple years, trying to work with this permit. And thank you everyone for attending. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.